Have you ever seen a superpower prepare for winter for generations, only to watch its own soldiers turn into statues in the snow? What if the cold that once protected Russia has now become the silent force helping break its army apart? Before we go deeper, do this with me right now. Tap like if you want sharp, honest war analysis. Subscribe if you prefer facts over noise, and share this video with one person who still thinks winter always fights on Russia's side. The images coming out of the front are hard to forget. White fields, frozen trenches, engines that refuse to wake up, men wrapped in old layers, crouched inside holes in the earth, trying to survive one more night. In some places, the temperature has dropped to around minus 22 degrees Celsius. That number sounds simple when you hear it, but on a battlefield, it changes everything. Metal bites skin, fingers stop working, batteries die faster, fuel thickens. Optics fog. Even the air feels sharp enough to cut through clothing, through boots, through confidence itself. And that is what makes this moment so shocking. Russia did not build its military story around sunshine or speed or elegance. It built it around endurance, around suffering, around the idea that no army on earth understands winter better. For decades, maybe centuries, that story became part of its power. Do not challenge Russia in the cold, the world was told. Do not expect hunger, distance, and ice to weaken them. Winter was not just weather in the Russian imagination, a force that would punish any enemy foolish enough to underestimate it. But now something darker is happening. The winter myth is colliding with modern war, and modern war is not won by myth. It is won by fuel that arrives on time, by boots that stay dry, by heaters that work, by engines that can start at dawn, by drones that can still fly in bad wind, by medics who can reach a freezing man before his body shuts down, by commanders who understand that bravery means nothing when a soldier cannot feel his hands. This is the central nightmare inside the title of this video. Russian troops are not simply facing cold weather, they are trapped inside a system that appears unable to protect them from it. And when an army is already under pressure from attrition, long supply lines, exhausted units, and constant battlefield exposure, extreme cold does not act like a normal challenge. It acts like an amplifier. It makes every weakness worse. That is why this story matters far beyond one freezing week. Because when soldiers freeze in large numbers, the real issue is almost never temperature alone. The real issue is that something deeper has failed. Planning failed. Supply failed. Equipment failed. Training failed. Leadership failed. The cold is only the last hand that closes around the throat. To understand how serious this is, we need to step back. Russia entered this war with a powerful image of itself. It was supposed to be the side that could absorb pain, the side that could lose more and still keep coming, the side that could push through terrain, weather, and damage longer than its enemy. And for a while, that image still carried weight. Even critics of the Kremlin often assumed one thing: if winter arrived, Russia would know how to use it. That assumption had history behind it. Napoleon learned the hard way that a Russian campaign could become a frozen graveyard. Hitler's armies also saw what happens when a modern force outruns its supply lines and meets cold it is not ready for. In popular memory, those disasters became proof of one big lesson. Russia and winter belong together. Invade at your own risk. But history can mislead when people remember the legend and forget the conditions behind it. Those past armies were fighting on or near Russian territory, against a state defending its home space, drawing strength from depth, distance, reserves, and a society organized around survival. That is very different from being the occupying force inside someone else's country, stretched across long front lines, dependent on roads, depots, trucks, and fragile chains of resupply. Winter did not magically save Russia in the past. Systems did, territory did, preparation did, sheer strategic depth did, and above all, the enemy's logistical collapse did. Now imagine Russian units exposed in Ukraine, far from home, rotating through battered sectors, pushing in small groups across open ground, relying on equipment that has already been overused for years. Imagine trenches filling with ice. Imagine old coats instead of proper layered winter systems. Imagine a soldier carrying a rifle but lacking warmth, rest, calories, and confidence. Imagine vehicles that already suffered from poor maintenance now facing brutal temperatures. Suddenly, the old myth begins to crack, because winter does not care about flags. Winter only asks one question: who is better prepared? Recent battlefield reporting has painted a grim picture in several sectors. Russian advances in some areas have slowed to a crawl. In places where months of attacks were supposed to produce meaningful breakthroughs, movement has been measured not in miles, not in kilometers, but in tiny pieces of ground. A few dozen meters, a little more here, almost nothing there. The cost, meanwhile, remains enormous. Men, ammunition, vehicles, time. And when cold weather joins that equation, the problem becomes brutal. If you are attacking, you are exposed more often. If you are exposed more often, the weather hurts you faster. If you are already undersupplied, each cold night acts like another enemy unit. That is one of the most important things people miss when they hear this story. Extreme winter conditions can punish both sides, yes, but not always equally. The side pushing forward across open terrain, the side trying to move men and machines into contested spaces, the side that must sustain momentum under fire, often suffers more. Offense in deep cold is expensive. It burns energy, fuel, and human strength at a terrifying rate. And this is where the Russian problem becomes more than a weather problem. It becomes a structural problem. For years, Russia has relied on mass, more shells, more men, more pressure, more repeated assaults. The basic logic was brutal but clear. Keep grinding, keep feeding the front, keep absorbing losses, and eventually the other side cracks first. That logic is ugly, but in attritional war, it can sometimes produce results. The problem is that mass is only useful if you can sustain mass. Bodies require food. Units require winter gear. Forward positions require heat. Trucks need spare parts. Wounded men need evacuation. Batteries need charging. Engines need service. Guns need ammunition. And in deep winter, every single one of those needs becomes harder and more urgent. A large army in freezing weather does not merely consume supplies, it devours them. Suddenly, every weakness multiplies. A delayed truck is no longer an inconvenience. It may mean frostbite. A broken stove is no longer discomfort. It may mean a dead squad by morning. A shortage of insulated boots is not poor administration. It is a direct wound to combat power. This is why the phrase "troops froze solid" hits so hard. It sounds dramatic, and it is. But beneath the drama is a terrifying military truth. Cold can remove soldiers from the fight without a shot being fired. No heroic charge can fix that. No propaganda slogan can reverse it. If a soldier's hands are numb, he cannot reload well. If he is shaking uncontrollably, he cannot aim well. If he has not slept because he spent the night trying not to die in the trench, he cannot think clearly. Once hypothermia and frost injury begin spreading through a force, the army starts losing more than men. It loses tempo, awareness, morale, and trust. Trust matters more here than many people realize. A soldier on the line asks a simple question: if I obey, will the system keep me alive? Not safe, not comfortable, just alive. If the answer starts becoming no, discipline weakens in quiet ways first. Men move slower, orders feel pointless, aggression disappears, fear rises, rumors spread, cynicism grows. Eventually, even basic tasks feel absurd. Why push forward 10 more meters if the cold may kill you before the enemy does? And this is why the Russian winter crisis is so dangerous. It attacks more than flesh, it attacks belief. If Russian troops were raised on the idea that their side understands hardship better than anyone, what happens when hardship begins exposing them instead of strengthening them? What happens when the famous General Winter no longer feels like a friend? What happens when the cold does not punish the enemy more than you, but punishes you for every mistake your leadership made over the last several years? If this is already changing how you see the battlefield, hit like, subscribe for more clear breakdowns, and share this with one friend who still thinks legends can replace logistics. Because the Kremlin's mistake may not have been simply underestimating a cold front. The larger mistake was assuming that old national mythology could substitute for modern military preparation. That is a fatal illusion. Legends do not heat tents. Pride does not insulate boots. Memory does not repair supply chains. Think about how the war itself began. There was a belief early on that weather and timing could be turned into tools. Frozen ground was expected to help movement. Seasonal pressure was expected to work against Ukraine. Later, winter pressure on energy and infrastructure was expected to break morale. But war kept refusing to obey that script. In one period, mud turned roads into traps. In another, cold hardened the earth but exposed different weaknesses, especially the human and logistical ones. In both cases, nature did not behave like a loyal ally, it behaved like a ruthless judge. If anything, the battlefield has revealed a cruel truth. Weather punishes the side that depends on fantasy, the side that says we will endure somehow, instead of asking, do our troops actually have what they need, is the side most likely to bleed from problems it refused to solve. Maybe that is why this feels so symbolic, because for so long Russia projected an image of endless toughness. Even outsiders sometimes repeated it. The Russian soldier can survive anything. The Russian machine may be ugly, but it keeps moving. The Russian state may be clumsy, but in great war it becomes relentless. Yet modern conflict is exposing the limits of that image. A soldier cannot eat mythology. A tank cannot run on patriotic memory. A frozen army is still a failing army, no matter how grand its old stories sound. Now let's push deeper, because the cold is only one layer of this story. Another layer is the nature of the front itself. This is not a clean battlefield. It is a harsh mix of drones, artillery, trench lines, ruined settlements, bad visibility, damaged roads, and constant surveillance. On some days, fog and wind do not just make life miserable. They affect the very tools modern armies now depend on. Small drones become less reliable. Observation becomes harder. Movement becomes riskier in a different way. Units can find themselves both exposed and blind. In such conditions, a side already struggling with coordination is in serious danger. That matters because modern war is not just about having weapons. It is about connecting systems. The rifleman, the drone operator, the artillery crew, the logistics driver, the medic, the engineer, the radio net, the thermal gear, the vehicle maintenance teams, they all form one chain. Winter attacks every weak link at once. If your batteries fade, your optics suffer. If your engines freeze, resupply slows. If resupply slows, morale drops. If morale drops, combat performance falls. If combat performance falls, losses rise. If losses rise, you push more replacements in. If you push more replacements in without fixing the system, the chain weakens again. And once that cycle begins, commanders often face terrible choices. Do they keep attacking and risk more troops freezing, breaking, or getting cut down while moving? Or do they pause and lose momentum, giving the defender time to strengthen positions? Neither option is good when political pressure demands visible progress. That political pressure is another hidden part of the nightmare. In many wars, battlefield decisions are shaped not only by what is possible, but by what leaders need to claim is possible. If the Kremlin wants signs of movement, local commanders may feel pressure to keep grinding even when conditions are screaming for caution. That can produce exactly the kind of waste we see in attritional campaigns: repeated effort, tiny gains, massive human cost. History gives us uncomfortable parallels here, not identical ones, but echoes. Large armies have marched into brutal winters before, believing size alone would carry them through. Some learned that numbers without preparation become a liability. More troops mean more mouths, more medical needs, more transport needs, more heating needs, more chances for breakdown. Finland taught this lesson to the Soviet Union in the Winter War. Germany learned it on the Eastern Front. The details differ, but the rule returns again and again: cold does not respect prestige. Which raises a disturbing possibility. Maybe the real enemy here is not weather. Maybe it is institutional decay exposed by weather. If procurement was corrupt, winter reveals it. If supplies were stolen, winter reveals it. If training was weak, winter reveals it. If equipment modernization looked better on paper than in reality, winter reveals it. Extreme conditions are unforgiving because they strip away excuses. In pleasant weather, a mediocre system can limp forward. In -22, mediocrity can kill. That may explain why stories of freezing troops resonate so strongly. They are not just stories about hardship. They are stories about exposure. exposure of false readiness, exposure of bad planning, exposure of the gap between military image and military reality. There is also a strategic consequence people should not ignore. An army that spends the winter trying to survive is not preparing well for the next phase. It is exhausting itself. It is burning equipment life. It is accumulating injured men. It is consuming stockpiles just to maintain presence. When spring comes and the ground changes again, the force that emerges from winter in poor condition is already behind. That is where this starts connecting to the future, not just the present. Because every season now seems to bring Russia a different form of pain. Mud slows vehicles. Summer exposes positions to drones and long-range strikes. Winter punishes weak supply and weak protection. There is no easy season left. That is a terrible development for any army that once believed time and climate would naturally lean in its favor. Ukraine, of course, suffers under winter too. Civilians suffer, soldiers suffer. Frontline conditions are awful on both sides. No serious observer should romanticize that. But suffering alone does not decide war. Systems do. External support does. Equipment quality does. Adaptation does. If one side has better access to winter gear, better medical support, better integration with modern battlefield tools, and stronger logistical backing, then the same cold can produce very different outcomes. Because war is not only about who can attack, it is about who can remain functional. And functionality in deep winter is an unforgiving test of state capacity. Can the state equip its men? Can it move supplies? Can it rotate units? Can it preventable injuries? Can it keep frontline troops believing they are not abandoned? Those questions may sound simple, but they are among the most important in the entire conflict. If troops are freezing in trenches, if movement is painfully slow, if old narratives about winter dominance are collapsing, then the message is larger than one bad weather event. The message is that the Russian war machine may be less resilient than it appeared, not weak in some absolute sense, not suddenly finished, but far more vulnerable to accumulated strain than propaganda wanted the world to believe. And when a military myth breaks, the consequences spread. Enemies grow bolder, allies grow uneasy, citizens grow doubtful, soldiers grow bitter, commanders grow desperate. That is why this is not a small embarrassment. It is a crack in the story Russia tells about itself. Now let's go even deeper into the human side, because statistics alone never capture the full cruelty of this kind of collapse. Imagine the night. No dramatic music, no clean uniforms, no cinematic heroism, just darkness, wet fabric turning stiff, a body burning energy too fast, and the terrible effort of staying awake because sleep in that state can be dangerous. Imagine trying to warm your fingers inside gloves that are already damp. Imagine hearing artillery far away while the real battle for the next hour is happening inside your own body. Keep the feet warm, keep the hands moving, keep the mind clear. Do not let panic take over. Do not fall into that heavy cold silence. Now add fear. Fear that help is late. Fear that the stove has no fuel. Fear that the vehicle meant to bring supplies never made it. Fear that the officers behind you still expect another push at dawn. If you're still with me, send up a signal. Like this video, subscribe for the next deep analysis, and share it with someone who thinks numbers matter more than readiness. This is how cold begins to hollow out an army from within. It turns each simple task into a burden. Carrying ammunition becomes harder when every movement costs more energy. Digging becomes harder when the ground is locked. Evacuating wounded becomes slower when roads are dangerous or frozen solid. Repair becomes harder. Sleep becomes worse. Thinking becomes duller. Even courage changes shape under these conditions. It is one thing to face fire. It is another to face slow freezing while knowing the system above you may be failing. They notice when promised gear does not arrive. They notice when replacements appear poorly equipped. They notice when vehicles are cannibalized for parts. They notice when leadership speeches grow bigger while the trench grows colder. Armies can survive hardship when hardship feels shared, meaningful, and competently managed. They begin to rot when hardship feels pointless, avoidable, and ignored. That is the danger to Russia right now. Not just casualties, not just stalled assaults, but moral corrosion. Moral corrosion is slow at first. It spreads through jokes, complaints, muttering, silence, then it becomes hesitation, then carelessness, then refusal, then collapse in small pockets. Commanders can punish some of this. They can threaten, they can force, but they cannot threaten frostbite out of existence. They cannot order an engine to start. They cannot command a hungry, exhausted body to perform like a fresh one forever. This is where the idea of unlimited manpower becomes misleading. Human beings are not abstract numbers. A replacement is not a fully ready combat asset the second he arrives. He must be clothed, fed, briefed, moved, integrated, protected, and psychologically held together. In winter war, the cost of turning bodies into combat power rises sharply. That is why simply saying they can send more men misses the deeper problem. More men without adequate support can mean more suffering without more capability. The more troops you pour into a strained system, the more that system breaks. More boots needed, more hot meals needed, more shelter needed, more medical care needed, more ammunition moved, more fuel burned, more maintenance cycles, more transport risk, more everything. If the system was already cracking, adding mass may widen the cracks instead of fixing them. That is what makes this moment feel so dangerous for Moscow's broader strategy. A strategy built on relentless pressure starts failing when the machinery behind the pressure cannot keep up. And once the tempo slows, the defender gains something precious: time. Time to observe, time to adapt, time to strike weak points, time to let the attacker exhaust himself under conditions he cannot master. There is irony here, and it is brutal. Russia once wanted winter to be part of its advantage. Instead, winter is now spotlighting the consequences of a long war: overused equipment, supply stress, and a command culture that may still confuse endurance with competence. A soldier can endure terrible things and still be trapped inside a badly run system. A nation can celebrate toughness and still fail to provide basics. A military can look large on paper and still struggle to convert numbers into sustainable battlefield results. The frozen front exposes all of that. And this is why the phrase Russian troops froze solid carries such emotional force beyond the immediate horror. It feels like more than a tragedy, it feels like a verdict on assumptions, a verdict on careless planning, a verdict on the idea that history itself would cover present weakness. When we strip away the noise, the core lesson becomes clear. In modern war, the side with the better story does not necessarily win. The side with the stronger logistics, smarter adaptation, better equipment, and more realistic leadership has the better chance. Not certainty, not destiny, just a better chance. And Russia seems to be learning that in the most painful way possible. Spring will not magically solve this. If anything, it may expose it further. Frozen ground eventually softens, movement changes, heavy equipment faces new problems. Units already weakened by winter do not suddenly become fresh. Frostbite cases do not vanish. Worn vehicles do not become reliable overnight. Lost time does not return. If the army spent the winter bleeding strength for tiny gains, it enters the next season with debt. That debt matters strategically. Every underfed soldier, every damaged engine, every failed assault, every night spent surviving instead of preparing. These all carry forward. War remembers accumulation. It remembers what was not fixed. It remembers who adapted and who merely endured. And perhaps that is the most important shift of all. Russia's old image suggested that endurance itself was enough. Stay hard, stay brutal, stay willing to sacrifice more. But the battlefield in Ukraine keeps delivering a different message. Endurance without efficiency becomes waste. Sacrifice without adaptation becomes repetition. Winter without preparation becomes a graveyard. Not just that troops froze, but that the freezing revealed a deeper truth the Kremlin can no longer hide so easily. An army that once counted on climate, mass, and mythology is now being judged by maintenance, coordination, and supply. And in that test, old legends offer no protection. So the next time someone says Russia owns the winter, remember these frozen trenches. Remember the stalled advances. Remember the soldiers fighting the cold as much as the enemy. Remember that weather never belonged to anyone. It only exposes who prepared honestly and who believed their own myth for too long. And if this war keeps proving anything, it is this: the battlefield is merciless to armies that confuse reputation with readiness. So here is the final question. If Russia can no longer trust winter, can no longer trust easy momentum, and can no longer hide these cracks behind old stories, then what exactly is left of the advantage it once thought history had guaranteed? If this video gave you a clearer picture than the usual headlines, lock in with one final move. Like for more deep breakdowns, subscribe so you catch the next analysis the moment it drops, and share this video with someone who still believes myths survive first contact with logistics. Because in the end, the cold did not just freeze soldiers, it froze an illusion. And when illusions freeze, they shatter.